Okay, now we're going to continue our lecture on cell parts, or aka organelles. Another organelle found in your cell is known as cytoplasm. It's found outside the nucleus, but inside that cell membrane, and it's the stuff that holds the organelles. It kind of looks like hair gel, so these organelles actually can float around throughout your cell, or toothpaste. Think of it like that, but it's clear, so hair gel would probably be a better analogy. Another name for cytoplasm is cytosol. Okay, so cytoplasm holds your cell parts, all these other organelles, allows them to move around the cell. If you've ever seen Ghostbusters, and in Ghostbusters there's the ectoplasm, and that's that green stuff that those ghosts spew out. Well, plasm, here, cytoplasm, ectoplasm, gooey stuff, but cytoplasm is actually found in your cells and not with ghosts. Okay, so then we have mitochondria. It's a very important cell part. It actually has two membranes around it. And the mitochondria, this is what's producing all that energy we've been talking about. That glucose that you eat, you take in oxygen. The glucose is in your digestive system, small intestines, gets into your blood takes it everywhere to every cell in your body. You breathe in oxygen gets to your lungs, from your lungs it gets into the blood, the oxygen is taken to every cell in your body, and once it's in the cell, the oxygen and the glucose head to the mitochondria, and inside the mitochondria, chemical reactions take place in order to produce energy. The mitochondria also has its own DNA, and this DNA has come from your mother. It's called mitochondrial DNA. You get it from your mother. It does not have any of you do not have any of your dad's mitochondrial DNA. So if they're doing a DNA testing and they can't get good DNA from any other cell, or from tissues or blood or anything like that, from a dead person, you have decomposition going on. So what they may have to do is look at mitochondrial DNA instead of nuclear DNA. And when they look at mitochondrial DNA, they can only trace the mother's side of the family, because you have none of your dad's mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA. We're not talking about the DNA in your nucleus. This is different. So the mitochondria, so let me draw a cell. Okay. We have a cell, we have our nucleus, we have a nucleolus, chromosomes. Chromosomes have DNA from both parents, 46 chromosomes, 23 from mom, 23 from dad. We have all those other cell parts we talked about in the other lecture. But the mitochondria just kind of looks like this. Okay, I'll draw it bigger here. There's membrane 1, here's membrane number 2. And this squiggly line membrane in there, that's where all these chemical reactions take place. And you can see we wouldn't want a straight line. That wouldn't give us enough area for chemical reaction. But by making this membrane squiggly, we have a lot more surface area for chemical reactions to take place so that your cells can make energy. Ribosomes. It's the only organelle that will not have a membrane around it, and one of the only organelles found in prokaryote cells. We talked about prokaryote cells a couple of lectures ago. Prokaryote cells are cells without a nucleus. Okay? They still have chromosomes, they just don't have a house for their chromosomes. So we're talking bacteria. Ribosomes are protein factories. These proteins are used by the cell. They may need further processing, may need to be delivered to certain locations, and may need to be packaged for export. But the ribosomes are the protein factories. They're making those enzymes in your body so that your body can function properly. Okay? And ribosomes just look like little tiny dots. Okay? So we have ribosomes floating around. Another cell part is the endoplasmic reticulum. And we're going to abbreviate it ER. It's a large membrane system of folded sacs and tunnels. There are two types, the smooth ER and the rough ER. Both of them, their job is to transport proteins. We just talked about ribosomes making the proteins, and sometimes they need to be transported to where they need to go. The ER does the transporting. It doesn't matter if it's the smooth ER or the rough ER. They're both transporting proteins. The only difference between the two is the way they look. The smooth ER looks smooth and the rough ER looks rough. And I'm not a very good artist, so my ERs aren't going to look very pretty. But we're going to draw an ER here. Okay, and we're going to draw another ER over here. In this ER, I'm going to put a bunch of dots. Those dots being ribosomes. The ribosomes are found on your rough ER. It makes them look rough. So not only are there ribosomes floating everywhere, there's ribosomes stuck on the outside of the rough ER. Its job is to transport proteins. And if you remember, we said your chromosomes or your DNA are used to help make proteins. So the squiggly lines in here, the chromosomes are making proteins, or helping to make proteins. They're actually being made in the ribosomes, so it makes sense that you have DNA and the rough ER kind of close together. So the DNA helps to make proteins. Ribosome actually does the process of the making of the proteins. Okay? And once those proteins are made, they need to be transported someplace, so then they get shipped wherever they need to go. My clue for the ER is, in real life, ER means the emergency room. Okay, an emergency room, you get there by ambulance or whatever, you're being transported by ambulance. So think of an ambulance heading to an emergency room, but in this case, it's the ER is transporting proteins and not bodies. So ER, emergency room, transporting bodies, but instead of bodies, think proteins or enzymes. It's my little clue to help you remember what the ER does. Oh, I forgot my clue for mitochondria. The mighty mitochondria. The mighty mitochondria. It's very mighty. It needs energy. The mighty mitochondria. Okay, and if you know who Mighty Mouse is, if you don't know, look him up, but Mighty Mouse needs a lot of energy. So the mighty mitochondria. Ribosomes make proteins. ER, the emergency room, we're transporting those proteins. Then our next cell part here is the Golgi body, sometimes called Golgi apparatus. I just tend to call it the Golgi. It's a stack of membrane sacs. It grabs those proteins from the ER, and it will process them further, and it will package them. So some proteins need packaged, and the Golgi does this. So it's the packaging center. It's kind of like the post office. And it kind of looks like a stack of pancakes with syrup coming off of it. So here's our Golgis. And there's the blobs of syrup coming off. These blobs are known as vesicles. Which are packaged proteins. Okay, so there's the blobs of syrup coming off our pancakes. So Golgi is the packaging center. You may think of it like a UPS center. It's packaging up the proteins and sending them then where they need to go. Okay, let's clear what we have. Oopsie. Okay, we'll go to microtubules and microfilaments. Microtubules and microfilaments together, they're known as the cytoskeleton. So you probably already know what they're going to do together. They give support. Okay. The microtubules are more tube-like. The microfilaments are more filamenty shaped. They're found more in animals than in plants. And the microtubules, if they're working by themselves, they're also going to help in cell division. But if they're with the microfilaments, they're going to be like a skeletal system. So the microtubules, okay, so you can see it's kind of rod-shaped. It's going to give all kinds of support. And the filaments are just, they look like all this stringy stuff, which is going to give support to the cells. Microtubules, by themselves, if they're working by themselves, cell division. Together the two form the cytoskeleton, giving extra support. Okay, now we're going to talk about the plastids. There are three types. Plastid, plant. They are only in plants. Plants only. I misspelled plants. We'll try this again. They're only in plants. Plants only. Plastid, plants. The leucoplast, plant. The chromoplast, found in plants. The chloroplast, found in plants. The leucoplast's job is to store starches, proteins, and lipids. It's like the refrigerator. It's like your refrigerator. Okay? Chromoplast stores color. You will see chloroplast or their function in a couple of weeks when all of our green trees turn red, yellow, and orange. Chromo means color. This summer you saw it in the flowers. You saw it in tomatoes, the tomatoes being red. Or peppers turning red. That is the chromoplast that you are now seeing. Chloroplast is green. And the only reason it's green is because it contains chlorophyll. That's not its function. That's not its job. Chloroplast's job is not to be green. Its job is to take the sun's energy and convert it into food that the plants can use. The food is starch or carbohydrate, which we've talked about many times. Chloroplasts are made of something called a thylakoid, which looks like a penny. These thylakoids stack on top of one another to form grana, which is like a stack of pennies. So here's a thylakoid. Okay, and this is grana. Here's the chloroplast, a very large chloroplast. Thylakoid, grana. Thylakoid, grana. So it's inside those lines where the chemical reaction takes place in order for the chloroplast to make the glucose, aka starch. Okay? So chloroplasts are turning the sun's energy into the glucose that comes together to form the starch. That's the food for plants. But guess what? We use it also. It's hooking with oxygen to give us energy. And that's what plants are using it for too. They get to store their extra starch in the leucoplast. And when they need it, they'll take oxygen, hook it up with the starch, and make energy. Just like us. All living things will take in something like starch, oxygen, and use it to make energy. It's just that plant cells have the ability to make their own food, to make their own starch, glucose. We cannot do that. We have to eat our starch. We have to eat our glucose. In other words, we have to eat our carbs. Because remember, it's glucose plus glucose plus glucose equals starch, which are carbs. And if we hook all that together with oxygen, we get energy. We, plants, any animal out there, anything living. Okay, so if you have chloroplast, yes, you're green, only because it contains a pigment that's green, but that's not its job. Its job is to take the sun's energy, okay, making some food, so then that the plants can make their own energy later by hooking up with oxygen.